Support for Flying Valiant builds is brought to you by 1st and 64th Customs, where no diecast is safe. VIDEOGEEK Productions, all business, all geek. The Brian Smith YouTube channel. Clever schemes for fun and profit. Westlake 164s on Instagram. Quality Customs. A generous grant from the Jonathan Vonesh Foundation, and from support from viewers like you. Please like, share, and subscribe. Well, if there's one thing I know you shouldn't do after you catch COVID, it's to go out and catch a bus. Hey there folks, Chuck here, and we're back doing the builds. So, in case you only watch the build videos, just a quick update. Feeling much better from COVID. Had a good Christmas with the rest of the family that was also infected with COVID, so we didn't get anybody else sick. And yeah, excited to be moving on with a new stage in my life where I will be at home more often, helping my wife run her business and building Flying Valiant into its own special thing. So there's going to be a lot of cool stuff coming. There's going to be new opportunities to work with me and for you to get some of the work that I build and hire me to do commissions and make stuff with my 3D printer and decals and all kinds of stuff. So if you see me doing something on a video and you go, hey, I'd really like that, shoot me an email at flyingvaliant@gmail.com. You may notice that right now we're looking at a test pattern and not the typical rotisserie shot of the car we're building today, and that's because I forgot to shoot it. And if there's one thing I know about making videos, it's to forget the thing that you cannot do a reshoot of. And I've done that very well here. So we will stop dancing around this test pattern and get straight to the breakdown. This was some repeat business from a gentleman I've done a few commissions for now named Ben. And I really enjoy working with him. He gives me a lot of freedom in the builds and really seems to enjoy my work. So I really appreciate that. And Ben wanted me to build a barn find VW bus for his friend Brian. And I loved that idea. His friend Brian has family history with Texaco, so he asked that I incorporate Texaco into the theme somehow. That was the only direction he gave me, which was great. The VW bus he picked, you may have noticed, had a luggage rack. So I wanted to load that up with stuff like a vehicle that has been stored in a barn might be used to have stuff stacked on top of it. For this build, I wanted to lean more on weathering pencils and on weathering powders to do most of the weathering on it. And there were a few other things I threw in, but I wanted to mix it up a little bit, and Ben's the kind of client that I can mix stuff up on, and he seems pretty down with me experimenting and trying new things. The other thing was that he wanted it done in time for Christmas to give to Brian as a Christmas present. More on that in a little bit. But for right now, ready? Punch that subscribe button. Let's boogie. As usual, we snap to the breakdown. Said we snap to the breakdown. What's this? No rivets? Yeah, this thing had no rivets on it, which was annoying. I have never come across a diecast car that didn't have rivets, and it took a little while to figure out. But ultimately, it turns out it was just pressed into place, and I just used a small screwdriver to pull it apart, and the bumpers were what was holding everything in place through the body. So once it was all apart, there was a lot of drilling that had to take place to get the glass out. I loved that the glass was all individual pieces, but it was a huge pain to get out. There was a lot of dust to clean up. But we got it all stripped down, and it was off to finishing the body. There were a few small casting lines, nothing really to worry about. There were a few spots where I drilled through the glass where it thinned out the metal a lot. Greenlight is kind of a double-edged sword because their metal is really thin, which is great for realism, but you gotta be really careful because it's very easy to drill through their stuff. So I did a little patching with some spot putty and moved on to the rust holes and dents. I didn't want too many dents on this. I actually tried to restrain myself a lot on the dents with this one. I wanted some rust holes, but I only put a few dents like you'd find up on the roof, like if something had fallen on the roof, like a branch or something, and stuck more to rust corrosion along the bottom. And once that was done, filed everything smooth, and it was off to the paint booth. In my mind, these second-gen VW buses are default orange and white, and I know Texaco is usually red and white, but in my head, I really wanted this to be an orange and white bus. And it turns out that Ryan has an orange bus, So this was actually kind of spot on. His is a little different though, but I wanted to do the orange and white two-tone. And this is actually Orange Rust is the name of the paint from Vallejo that I used. And then I used some, I think this was just thinned out pavement color craft paint on the bottom as a base. The logo track was going to be completely covered, but I did do an initial coat of oily steel just to give it a base for anything that showed through. I busted out the mirror paint to do the chrome details on the interior. The interior I left as just a straight white. I think I might have even just used the primer white because I knew that it was going to be covered in washes and such. The outside I didn't want to do a lot of chrome on, so I stuck with flat steel for the outside details like the hubcaps. Then I needed stuff for that luggage rack. It was time to fire up the Anycubic Photon and go on Thingiverse and find some stuff to throw on that luggage rack. I do love 3D printing. It's really revolutionized this hobby for me just because it makes things so much faster. Like, you can make these items. It's not that hard to make them out of clay or whatever. It just takes more time. But once I covered them with sealer, this is that sealer that I don't like, but it works okay as a brush on, especially for stuff that's going to be really weathered. So I'm using it up that way and saving my good sealer for the airbrush. I got this interesting filter that I wanted to try. It was called Neutral Gray for White from MIG. And I wanted to see what it looked like over the white that I painted on the bus. And it was an interesting effect. It's incredibly subtle, very, very subtle. And I really liked the effect. Unfortunately, you're not going to see it by the time I'm done with it. But I wanted to put it over the white on the interior too and see how it looked. It's almost impossible to see here on video, but it does create a noticeable difference, but it's very subtle. I love how it turned out. It would be really great for like a very subtly dirty car, but that's kind of hard to do in this scale. I used Vallejo Dry Rust here as my initial chipping. I skipped over the weathering pencil chipping entirely on this one because I wanted to do the chipping and the rust a different way, but use colored pencils still in a different way. Again, I used the dry rust in spots to add shadow on the underside of the chassis. I knew I was going to come back through here with more powders, but I wanted the dry rust because it's such a dark color to establish the base and the shadows and go on the bottom of everything rusty. And I did the rim of the spare tire cover, stippled with some of it as well, and then went over some of the larger things like the oil barrel and the gas can that would be quite rusty and gave them a good base of dry rust. I didn't want it to be super thorough. I made sure it was actually kind of purposefully splotchy because then it would show through and have a good mottled texture to it. So I used Tamiya weathering powders. I have a set of Tamiya Set A and Tamiya Set C. This is one of the sand textures, which is actually great for a very light dry rust look and good dry dusty finish, and then went over that with orange rust to give me a good mix of textures. And I really liked how this turned out. I actually really liked how this chassis turned out. It was very realistic looking. It has a really great matte finish to it and really captures that dusty, rusty look that you would find on a barn find chassis. Once the accessories had dried, I brought out some red paint. This is ATSF red to do the gas can and the oil barrel to give it a dull red finish. There was a little cooler that I printed, and I have an actual Coleman cooler, vintage style Coleman cooler that's that shade of green, so I went with that green. And this is a toolbox that I 3D printed, and I wanted to do it in blue. Again, I like to make my builds colorful even though they're weathered, and I try to incorporate as many different colors as I can just to give the eye different bits of interest to look at. So I went over this one with a light blue just to add some depth and some difference to the stuff in the interior. This is weathered wood on the wood crate, and I used light under, I think this is light gray undercoat from Polyscale that I used to create the silver of weathered wood. Can you hear all those dogs? That's interesting. It's a nice day here in Florida, so I got my windows open. So continuing the accessory painting, this is grimy black for the plastic oil catch can that I put on the interior. My reference material showed a lot of these buses with the paint worn through to gray primer, so I used the Concrete Marks pencil to create primer wear through, which is kind of a first for me. I haven't really done primer wear through on too many of my builds. I've done it a little bit. I wanted to rely more on paint fade on this weathering more than actual just rust. So went over this with the concrete marks pencil, and again, I'm just dipping it in water, rubbing it on, and then going back over it with a stippling brush. Also on my reference vehicle, there was a rusty quarter panel, and I really liked that look, so I went to emulate that with the light rust colored pencil here, and then I went around the edges. Again, I wanted this to be more of a pale color with a lot of the rusting because it would be a barn find, so it wouldn't be like wet rust, and it wouldn't have a lot of the indications of heavy rust that a vehicle kept outside would have had. So I went with light rust almost exclusively for my rusting here. This is just a pile of suitcases that I found on Thingiverse. I'll link to all of the different models I used in the description, so if you want to use these for your own 3D printing, I'll make it easier for you to find them. It's still a huge learning curve to do 3D printing, but it is getting a lot easier. There's so much more support out there, and it's really kind of a cool time to be experimenting with this stuff. This is me finishing loading up the luggage rack and moving on to the interior. I had a little milk crate that I had printed and a little toolbox, and I wanted another oil barrel on the inside and the big toolbox and just a little crate to put in there. I used the mirror paint again on the headlights. I loved that this casting had lensed headlights, and I was tempted to leave one of them broke off, but I loved the little lensed headlights so much I didn't want to risk losing them, so I put them back in. Again, I kept the chrome to a pretty minimal amount on the outside of the car because these typically don't have a lot of chrome on them. I did do the headlights and taillights and the door handles, knowing that they would again get covered with subtle washes and finishes to dull everything up. This is just a ultra matte being brushed on to seal everything up. I also love that this casting had painted bumpers. I love painted bumpers. I breezed over it earlier, but I used tissue paper like you'd put in a gift bag and some matte Mod Podge to make the blanket on the middle seat of the bus. Once the mirror paint had dried, I used some water-based turn signal amber and stoplight red with a little Wraithsbone for the backup lights to give it kind of a faded look. These acrylics, if I were to use them on a nice build, I would probably be disappointed with them, but for a weather build, they do a great job of looking like faded turn signal lenses and faded stoplight lenses. So they're kind of perfect for my builds, and I think honestly they're probably better for small scales like these because they don't look too red or too amber like the enamel ones can sometimes look. They look just a little too much. There's too much brightness to them, and it makes the turn signals and the stoplights look brighter than they actually are. Putting the glass back in was trickier than I thought it would be, mostly because I forgot that the windshield goes in through the front. It doesn't go in through the inside, and I just used some white glue to hold everything in place with the glass because you don't want CA glue fogging up your windows. If I'm going to fog up the windows, I want it controlled, which I'll do later. And it was time to stick the cute little lenses back in. I was so paranoid I was going to lose them. I snapped off the pegs for the spare tire holder, so I had to glue them back on. And kind of the same for the bumpers. And snap it all back together. The time between those two shots is almost an hour, by the way, because getting it back together was a bit of a problem. It did not want to fit back together well. Anyway, I went into Photoshop and made a Texaco decal for the doors and for the spare tire cover, using something that would be period correct for the era of the bus, and gave it a Washington State license plate since that's where Ben and Brian are. Then it was time to fade up the decals a little bit. I could weather them in Photoshop, but I prefer to do them with powders outside of the computer. I feel like if I trust the monitor with weathering and making stuff pale, it might come out too pale. So I do my distressing of decals in person because that's where the actual decals would get weathered. Then used the light sand weathering powders to go around and dust up the windows. Was really happy with how that turned out. Dust up the upper areas, the tops of the bumpers and stuff to make it look like dust had settled for years on this bus. And then went around with a cotton swab and wiped it off like somebody had come along and wiped the windows just to kind of look in so you can see a little bit more of the details. And then underneath I did some black soot powder to add some shadow and depth to the casting and a few touches of orange rust here and there. And with that, it was time for the decal and to complete my 25th build for this channel, which is very exciting. and then get this bad boy sent off to Ben. Anyway, here's the stock image of the car that I started with. I actually forgot to do this for my next build too, so expect another stock photo there. Anyway, here's what we ended up with. I really like how this one turned out. It's a really nice representation of a barn find bus that's been sitting for a long time and had stuff stored in it and on it and is ready to find a new home and be an easy project for someone who will bring it back to life. So, since building this, I sent it to Washington. It supposedly ended up in Washington and then ended up back in my mailbox the day before Christmas. So unfortunately, Brian, I'm sorry, it did not make it in time for Ben to give it to you. So we're sending it again, and it seems to be lost in the postal ether right now. So we're trying to sort that out. So hopefully by the time you watch this, it will be back on its way, and we will have it in Brian's hands soon. Otherwise, I'm building this car again. Anyway, as always, I'd like to thank my patrons, including the ones that you saw at the beginning of the show, and my Rockford level patrons, which include Evan at Mid-Island Custom Diecast. Thank you, Evan. Please subscribe to his channel in the link in the description below. He has a fantastic channel and does amazing work. My amazing wife, Carolyn, who, as I mentioned earlier, has started a math tutoring business. And you can always email me at flyingvaliant@gmail.com if you want somebody to do high school or college level math tutoring, and she will be happy to do that over Zoom for you. And welcome to my new Rockford level patron, Andrew over at Maple Leaf Customs. He is an amazing customizer as well, and he does a really cool thing where all his builds go to charity, which is really awesome, and he's a really good guy, and please subscribe to his channel. His link will also be in the description below. Also want to thank my Douglas level patrons, the Good Bad Better podcast, formerly known as the Drew Rants and Raves podcast, Jordan Kleinhenn, Curtis Crafts YouTube channel, the Jim Silva YouTube channel, and Devil's Details Diecast YouTube channel. Thank you all for being amazing. Links to everybody's stuff in the description below. Thank you all for your generous support. This would literally not be here without you. Like I mentioned earlier, if you want to buy a build that you've seen in a video or order a commission for yourself, you can always email me at flyingvaliant@gmail.com. I know a lot of these videos have been commissions this season, but that's what I'm building, and they've fortunately been interesting enough that I think they're worth making videos of. So there will be more challenges coming up, but for now, I'm sticking with the stuff that's helping keep this channel going, and I'm incredibly grateful for them. Well, I heard from Ben, and he was really happy with this build, but what do you think? Let me know what you think of this different technique in the comment section below. I know I didn't use my chipping pencil that I usually use a lot, but I think this one worked better without it. Like I said, I'm always interested in your thoughts or on something that you'd like to see me try, as I'm trying more weathering techniques and different styles of building. So let me know in the comments what you think. Thanks as always for subscribing, liking the videos, sharing them. It really helps how this channel's grown. I'm amazed that we're at over 750 subscribers now, and really grateful to all of you for continuing to watch, support, like, share, all that good stuff. So I've got another video coming up very soon that I'm working on, and hopefully we will get that recorded and out shortly. The car's already done and in the commissioner's hands, so I should have that video up in a couple days. If you're interested in supporting the channel, you can always check out my Patreon at flyingvaliant.com. This is really the bread and butter of how I keep the channel going. It pays for all of my supplies and any of the cars that I pick up, which I've got a really epic unboxing video coming that was courtesy of my patrons, so I can't wait to show that off to you. Patrons will be getting my non-deadline based builds several days sooner than everybody else, so they get a sneak preview at what's ahead, so they've already had a chance to watch this video. You can, as always, get more glamour shots of my builds at Flying Valiant on Instagram or at Flying Valiant on Facebook, and as I get more established, I will be posting more Patreon exclusive content over there, so I'm really excited to be rewarding them with extra bonus features now that I have a little more time now that I'm at home. If you really like Flying Valiant and you want to show that support to your friends and family, you can visit my TeePublic store through JEPEG Design, which is run by my amazing brother Justin. He did the logo and has come up with a lot of really cool automotive themed merch, and there's Flying Valiant masks and stickers and t-shirts and all kinds of fun stuff. He's also working on some special Diecast themed designs that will be showing up in his store soon, so be sure to keep an eye on that. The link will be in the description. Again, thank you so much for joining me through this really crazy year. We've almost made it. I am so grateful to everyone who's subscribed and followed and wished me luck, and it's really kind of an amazing community to be a part of. So grateful to be here. As always, please subscribe so you can follow my progress both with this hobby and with me as I figure out what I'm doing in the world of diecast collecting and displaying. I can't wait to show you some cool stuff that's coming up next. As always, I want to thank you for coming along with me for the ride. So, until next time, stay fresh, cheese bags.